meeting do you have?
Dear colleagues, good morning. The sitting is open. The first item on the agenda is the urgent debate on the report titled Situation of the Children of Ukraine, document 15901, presented by Mrs. Olena on behalf of the Committee on Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development, with an opinion. The document is under number 15902, presented by Mrs. Sandra Zamba on behalf of the Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons Committee. After the rapporteurs, there will be a statement from Mrs. Olena Volodymyrivna Zelenska, First Lady of Ukraine, who will be joining us online. In order to finish by 11:30 a.m., I will interrupt the list of speakers at about 11:15 a.m. to allow time for the reply and vote on the draft resolution. I now call Mrs. Olena Komenko, rapporteur for the committee. Dear Olena, you have 7 minutes now and 3 minutes for your reply at the end of this debate. You have the floor.
Fellow colleagues, as we gather today, I am compelled to address a matter that lies heavy on our hearts. The dire situation of the children of Ukraine amidst the brutal war of aggression. Our discussion revolves around a resolution aimed at safeguarding these young, vulnerable lives who have witnessed unspeakable horrors. No child in Ukraine has been spared by this war. Many have lost their parents and relatives, suffered injuries, and endured traumas that no child should ever experience. Displacement, both internal and external, has disrupted their lives, severing the bonds of friendship and community. The resolution we're discussing today is a critical step in responding to the numerous challenges these children face. Last April, the Assembly adopted a resolution recognizing the deportation of Ukrainian children as a genocidal act by Russian authorities. It was a clear condemnation of these atrocities and a call for the safe return of these children. Since then, we have seen meaningful progress. The first summit of heads of state and governments of the Council of Europe in Reykjavik echoed our commitment to justice for these children. Our current resolution would not rest on this issue. The perpetrators of crimes against Ukrainian children shall face charges and consequences. The International Coalition for the Return of Ukrainian Children, formed last December, further bolsters our efforts. We also established an ad hoc committee of the Bureau on December 2023 to discuss the situation of Ukrainian children, particularly addressing the issue of deported and forcibly transferred children. The discussions were extremely informative and conclusive, and they formed the basis for many points we suggest in the resolution and recommendation. I deem this fora would remain important to push forward the mission of returning the children and their homes. However, challenges abound in the process of returning these children. The passage of time, bureaucratic hurdles, and the absence of unified legal mechanism all pose significant barriers. We must address these issues with urgency and precision. The plight of orphans and children without adequate legal representation is particularly distressing. They represent a unique challenge, as family reunification is not an option. Here, the principle of the child's best interest must be our guiding light, ensuring their right to identity, physical, emotional, and legal safety. We have seen promising strides in locating and documenting these children, but much remains unknown. The task of understanding each child's story behind the statistics is daunting yet essential. It enables us to create individualized plans for their return, respecting their best interest. The principle of the child's best interest is multifaceted. It is not just about physical return, but ensuring the holistic well-being of each child. It's about creating a future where these children can thrive, not just survive. In this context, it has become crucial for us to deliver and endure this best interest. The Council of Europe Action Plan for Ukraine, encompassing the years 2023 to 2026, stands as a pivotal framework within which various support measures can be implemented. Central to this initiative is the imperative to address the multifaceted needs of Ukrainian children who have been profoundly affected by the war. One of the most pressing issues is the need for housing reconstruction. Many Ukrainian children, including orphans and those in foster care, have lost their homes due to the conflict. Rebuilding these homes is not just about providing shelter, it's about restoring a sense of security and normality. This calls for substantial contributions and coordinated efforts potentially facilitated through the Council of Europe Development Bank to ensure that these children have a safe place to call home. Moreover, the physical and psychological rehabilitation of status children, those most affected by the war, is critical. Many countries across Europe can play a significant role by welcoming these children and providing them with the necessary medical and psychological care. This includes specialized rehabilitation programs that cater to their unique needs stemming from the traumas of war. The mental health of these children is another area that requires immediate reaction and attention. The war has left indelible marks on the young minds, necessitating a robust response in terms of mental health support. This includes training child psychiatrists, implementing modern therapeutic techniques, and ensuring that Ukrainian children, whether in Ukraine or abroad, have access to necessary mental health services. Healthcare collaboration forms another vital aspect of this support. Initiatives like International Medical Partnership Program, led by Olena Zelenska, pave the way for effective collaboration between Ukrainian healthcare institutions and their international counterparts. This not only facilitates the exchange of expertise, but also ensures that Ukrainian children receive the best possible medical care. The educational needs of Ukrainian children are equally important. With thousands of educational institutions, including kindergartens, destroyed, there is a dire need for reconstruction, along with the construction of bomb shelters to safeguard against future conflicts. This effort requires significant financial resources, which can be pulled from various donors and local authorities. Additionally, the provision of school buses and the enhancement of digital solutions to allow distance learning are crucial to ensure uninterrupted educational process. Integrating Ukrainian children into new environments is another challenge. Language barriers, cultural differences, and the trauma for displacement can impede their integration. Addressing this involves not only language courses, but also the inclusion of Ukrainian studies in school curricula, the establishment of Ukrainian weekend schools, and efforts to make the host country's education system more inclusive and aware of the Ukrainian context. Lastly, the recognition of the Ukrainian educational program abroad is vital. Just as Ukraine recognizes foreign education components, other countries should reciprocate by recognizing Ukrainian subjects studied online. This mutual recognition is essential for the educational continuity of Ukrainian children displaced by the war. In conclusion, the combined efforts in these areas, housing, rehabilitation, mental health, healthcare collaboration, education, integration, and mutual recognition of educational programs from a comprehensive approach to support the children of Ukraine. This approach not only addresses their immediate needs, but also lays the groundwork for their long-term well-being and development. To this end, the resolution will call for full reparation for all violence committed against children and for justice to be delivered. In closing, I implore each one of us here to consider the gravity of our responsibility. These children are not mere statistics. They are the future of Ukraine. A future that currently faces unprecedented challenges. Our actions, decisions, and resolutions today will shape their tomorrow. Thank you, dear colleagues.
Thank you, Mrs. Komenko. And I call now Mrs. Zamba, rapporteur for the opinion. Dear Sandra, you have 3 minutes.
Grazie. Thank you, Mr. President. Le bambine e I bambini.
Children in Ukraine who have been forced to live in a situation of war and conflict are victims in two different ways. Victims because they are forced to endure the violence which war brings with it, and victims too because their age means they're extremely vulnerable. Amongst the very worst forms of suffering which somebody can endure is the state or condition of refugee, which means that person loses their reference points, something which are essential for the growth and development of every child. They also lose their rights to a home, to education, to socialization, to love and affection, and to healthcare. Fundamental rights that the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child asks countries which have signed that convention, and this includes all the countries in Europe which have signed that UN convention. So all those countries are expected to respect and promote the rights of the child. So while we mourn the sad loss of so many children, more than 500, and those injured, 1,195, we have a duty to ensure that internally displaced children in the country receive the urgent humanitarian support in sufficient quantity that they need so badly. This humanitarian support, which is made even more important and urgent by the harsh conditions in winter, is addressed by the 5 amendments, all of which were adopted unanimously yesterday, with great support yesterday, and they actually further strengthen the report from the Social Affairs and Health Committee. In these amendments, a call goes out to the member states of the Council of Europe to do their best to provide this support. According to UN data, the humanitarian response plan has so far only received 53% of the funding promised. We have to support the efforts of those providing humanitarian aid, who have already managed to help 11 million people in Ukraine, but estimates suggest that 1.5 million young girls and 1.5 million young boys still need support, our support and that of the rest of the world. So let's add our voice to those others in this assembly to guarantee the safety, security and protection of the displaced children in Ukraine.
Thank you, Mrs. Zamba. Dear colleagues, as we will have our debate under urgent procedure this morning on the situation of the children of Ukraine, we are honored to have with us via video link the First Lady of Ukraine, Mrs. Olena Zelenska. The tragedy in which your country was driven.
The last time we met, almost a year ago, when we spoke about deportation of Ukrainian children, and what I would most like to say now, a year later, is that everything is over, that everyone is finally home. But this is not the case. Other rescue operations to free our children from Russian captivity have lasted all this year, and my whole country rooted for each of them. There was the 17-year-old Bohdan Yermokhin. His story speaks of all the pain of the Russian invasion. The orphan boy lived in Mariupol. Together with other kids from his orphanage, he saw the destruction of his city and its residents. Then he was deported to Russia, and there, in that foreign land, he turned 18. And he was to be drafted to the Russian army. What can be more cynical? They kidnap a child, they destroy his city, and then they drive into war against his homeland with the hordes of invaders. Bohdan is an extremely strong person. He ran away. They caught him. He found a way to record and send home a request for help. As a result of very complicated operations, engaging several countries and dozens of caring people around the world, he returned home. He was released not only from captivity, but also from forced service in the aggressor's army. That's why I say that his story shows how many trials and tribulations our children are experiencing in Russian captivity. They are subjected to psychological and increasingly more often physical violence. Like Serhiy from Kupiansk, another abducted teenager. In captivity, he learned what the pit meant. This is when the occupiers forced the victim to dig a full-length hole and then crouch there under the gunfire of Russian machine guns, sometimes for several days. Serhiy is one of those who, fortunately, we managed to bring back home this year, but his story corroborates another problem we face when rescuing and deporting children. It is easier to save those kids who are older, who can send information, who remember their friends or relatives in Ukraine. Younger children who are helpless or intimidated are more difficult to find and rescue. A grandmother fought for the return of 10-year-old Yura and 3-year-old Maxim from Donetsk region. They are the children of her twin daughters. We still don't know what happened to their mothers during the occupation. Russia didn't want to give them away either. It didn't want them to talk about it. Perhaps the hardest stories are those where the child has been released, but the mother was not. That's the case of your 11-year-old Mitro. He now lives in Kiev with his aunt, and he asks when his mother will return. But his mother is in Russian captivity, and the Ukrainian side has no information about her. These are just a few stories about the 388 children returned to Ukraine. In total, there are more than 19,000 children in Russian captivity. At this rate, it will take us 50 years to bring them back. You remember that Moses led his people through the desert for 40 years. He did so that people would forget slavery and feel free. But in our case, 40 or 50 years yield the opposite result. One can forget oneself even faster. We see this even with the returned children. They have been told that they are not welcome at home, that no one needs them, and we try to restore their sense of home and country, their faith in people in general. To do this, Ukraine has a whole reintegration program called Bring Kids Back UA, aimed at implementing President Zelenska's peace formula, Artem 4, release of all prisoners and deportees. We try to support these children in all ways possible, from psychological assistance, education, new opportunities, to new families, so that they do not feel orphaned and are surrounded by love and care. Incidentally, if you in the international community have ideas on how to help the children who have been returned, we're happy to listen. We're happy to do anything that will help our children get over the pits, beatings, and threats they endured in Russia. Dear participants, a lot has happened this year. From your previous resolution to the Declaration on Ukrainian Children adopted at the Summit of Heads of State and Government at the Council of Europe Advisory Group on Children in Ukraine has started its work. The International Coalition for the Return of Ukrainian Children has had its first meeting. We are grateful to every country and every person who cares, but time is against us. Recently, the Russian dictator ordered to grant Russian citizenship to the abducted Ukrainian children. His henchmen, such as the leader of one of Russia's pro-government parties, Mironov, publicly appropriated a girl abducted from Kherson. We know her name is Margarita. She's a little over a year old. She's one of the 48 kids who was taken from the Kherson regional orphanage when the city was occupied. We need to act faster. We don't have 50 years to save children. Even a year is too long for an abducted child. You may remember from history that the Nazis had a program whereby they took children from the occupied territories to be adopted into Aryan families. There were hundreds of thousands of such children in Eastern Europe, and only some of them could return to their homelands, to Poland or to the Baltic states after liberation, because they no longer remembered. They had been forbidden to speak their native languages at once. But even now one can read heartfelt reports about how very elderly people are looking for their real families and their origins, because this has haunted them for all their lives. Do we want this to happen again? Are there not enough crippled lives in Europe and the world? Can we allow our world to be so terrible, where molestation is rampant and can encroach upon everyone and any child? This is why I urge everyone to act faster and more united. I ask the national parliaments to join in. We must force Russia to comply with the Geneva Conventions and immediately provide comprehensive lists with the names and whereabouts of all Ukrainian children who have been illegally deported, because it degrades the very idea of the international law if it is so cynically ignored and abused. At the beginning, I said that every rescued child is a special operation involving many countries and dozens of people who care. That's how we can succeed. And there are dozens of caring countries and millions of caring people in the world. At least I believe in this. I believe that all the children of the world are our common children, because they are the future of the world. Meanwhile, we, the adults, are their present world. Together we can do it, but only together. Thank you.
Madam Zelenska, thank you for the honor you made to us and the time you took to address the Assembly for the second time. As our rapporteur, Mrs. Olena, just a few minutes earlier mentioned, the children's missing are not mere numbers of statistics, but the future of Ukraine. Madam Zelenska, I want to inform you that the exhibition of the children of Ukraine, which I had the honor to open 2 days ago, has contributed to raising visibility. All VIPs, presidents and prime ministers visited these days the Assembly had the opportunity to visit the exhibition and witness on first hand what the citizens of Ukraine had written. Once again, I want to thank you for being with us today, and I want to reassure you that we'll stand by you to find a solution to this nightmare. Thank you so much. Dear colleagues, following the debate, and I call first for the 3 minutes that he has to give his speech, Mr. Birgir Thorarinsson, on behalf of the European People's Party. Dear Birgir, you have the floor.
Mr. President, we parliamentarians have hopes and dreams for our children, and so do Ukrainians. Russia has stolen the hope and dreams of thousands of Ukrainian children, boys and girls, and some of them just babies. They have taken them from their families, taken them from their home, and stolen their identity. From the start of the invasion, the Russian authorities steadfastly removed children from Ukraine, aiming to turn them against their homeland. Kidnapping children is a devastating crime. Families are searching for them, desperate to find them and bring them back home before their names are changed and they become untraceable. Russia demands the release of hostages in Gaza. At the same time, they are kidnappers themselves who have been incriminated by the International Criminal Court for stealing children, incriminated for war crimes. We demand the release of Ukrainian hostages, Ukrainian children in Russia, occupied territories, and Belarus. We are the voice of 46 European states. We have a strong voice when we are united, and we are united with Ukraine. The abduction of another nation's children is a form of genocide. International mediation plays a vital role in bringing the children back home, and Ukraine has expressed openness to the international mediation. Qatar successfully mediated the return of 4 children in October by facilitating direct talks between Russia and Ukrainian authorities. Every child that comes back home brings us hope. I believe that communications between Ukrainian and Russian officials is vital in order to bring the children home. I encourage member states to do whatever they can to broker communication between Ukrainian and Russian officials for the sake of the Ukrainian children. Targeted communication plans are also important. Community engagement programs, social media campaigns, and educational initiatives to enhance public involvement in identifying missing children increase the chances of successful returns. At the ad hoc committee meeting in Paris in December, discussions centered on refining international legal mechanism for child returns, with an examples on extradition treaties. The focus was also on streamlining cooperation channels and proposing a joint liaison office to facilitate real-time information change between countries. Mr. President, as time passes, the situation for every single child becomes increasingly complex. We must never forget the stolen children, the stolen Ukrainian children in Russia, in occupied territories, and Belarus. We must never give up.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now the floor goes to Lord David Blencathra. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I congratulate the authors of these reports for the work they have done in drawing this terrible situation to our attention. It's difficult to understand the depth of suffering these children are enduring, and also their relatives whose children have been taken by the Russian regime. Let's just quickly look at the statistics to get an appreciation of the horror. 20,000 children forcibly deported to Russia and forced to become Russian. The Russian Children's Commissioner Maria Belova says Russia has taken 700,000 people. But the US State Department says 900,000 Ukrainians have been deported to Russia. In Ukraine, 3,800 schools and educational establishments have been destroyed. There's 1.3 million Ukrainian children in other EU countries, but they have no legal rights there. And there's 4 million children still in Ukraine who need urgent humanitarian assistance. I find it difficult to get my head around such terrible statistics. However, today we are looking here how we can help the children still in Ukraine. Now, from December to March, the average temperature in Ukraine is -5 centigrade, but can drop as low as -20. Well, last week I was in Finland at the COE conference in Belarus, and I experienced in the far north -34 degrees centigrade, but I had layer upon layer of specialist thermal clothing, and I was still cold. But these children in Ukraine are sheltering in broken buildings with no heat, nor have they adequate food. They're therefore lacking the 2 essentials for survival, heat and calories. These are their basic survival needs. But of course, they can't go to school, they can't play outside, they can't have all the normal interactions children have with each other, their parents, grandparents, and relatives. And goodness knows how their mental health will suffer now and in the future. And getting aid to them is very difficult, since they're dispersed throughout Ukraine. But we need to support the amendments here today, calling on governments and volunteer humanitarian organisations to try and step up their existing activity in order to help them. And I also like Amendment E. It's very good. And there must be many experts amongst the parliamentarians from our 47 countries who can advise on how we can help the children still in Ukraine or elsewhere in Europe or those deported to Russia. Russia's war of aggression is utterly evil. It has daily deliberately targeted the killing of civilians to destroy the civilian infrastructure and break the morale of the people. It's laid millions of landmines, which will continue killing for generations after the war is over. It's laid waste the environment, destroying wildlife and buildings, which will require billions of tons of concrete to rebuild. And it is committing the ultimate war crime of kidnapping children in order to Putinize them. Colleagues, we can do nothing about those things at the moment, but we can act now to help the starving and destitute children still in Ukraine, and I support the resolution and the amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Blanchatra. Now the floor goes to Mrs. Ivenia Kravchuk. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, colleagues. I'm honored to speak on behalf of the ALDE Group, and ALDE Group will support the resolution. And yesterday I was preparing and I was thinking what new words I can find to address this very tough topic. And I think the worst thing what could happen, and already happening, I think, that all these atrocities are becoming a normality, normal news. 2 days ago, another 8-year-old girl in Kharkiv died in her bed because of the Russian rocket hitting her home. 17 kids with diseases from Donetsk 2 days ago were moved to Moscow for treatment. And that can add to the abducted kids in the long list. Yesterday, we marked 700 days of full-scale invasion. And soon we will mark 10 years of the aggression itself. You know what? It's the age of my daughter. And we have the whole generation of kids that never had a peaceful day in their life. But coming back to this very important text, very important resolution and recommendation, we address a lot of issues here. Not just about the abduction of the kids, which are war crimes and possibly genocide, but also how we can help those kids who are in Ukraine and how we can better help those who seek shelter in your countries. Regarding the deportations, remember the name of the program, Bring Kids Back UA. Google it, make sure that your government is in the program, can contribute, and remember this horrible number that First Lady said, 50 years. 50 years, that's how long it would take if we would be returning just one child per day. About what we can do as adults inside of your countries. Of course, humanitarian projects for those kids who are in Ukraine. Education, better education access, better access to medicine. Prosthesis is a huge problem because kids who lost their arms or legs are growing, and prosthesis has to be changed with them. Of course, in your countries, you welcome those who are temporarily seeking shelter. Make sure they do not lose their identity. Make sure they have access to Ukrainian culture, to Ukrainian language, and of course they are socialized at the same time. I would like to especially thank the rapporteurs that did the report, both and report for opinion, and Ms. Olena. She did a tremendous job on this. And the last but not the least, we have to re-establish again the ad hoc committee on Ukrainian children, so all of the members of the Assembly could contribute to this very important work. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Kravchuk. And now the floor goes to Mr. Emmanuel Fernandez. The floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This war of aggression that Russia has launched against Ukraine over the last 2 years approximately has caused some 10,000 civil victims with an incredible violence, which has led to the exclusion of Russia as well from our institution for having trampled on all of its principles. human life that's been lost. We're talking about 1 million civilians who are refugees outside of Ukraine, as well as tens of thousands of people have been forcibly displaced, either outside of the borders of Ukraine or towards Russia or Belarus. This enlightening report from today is continuing the work that's carried out by our Assembly in Resolution 2495 and Recommendation 2253, which were adopted in April of 2023. Based on the work done by the rapporteur, Mr. Paul Pisco, on deportations and forcible transfers of Ukrainian children and other civilians to the Russian Federation or to temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories. This report from today continues to tell us about the danger in which Ukrainian children are in. All of them, with no exception, are victims of war. Their particular vulnerability means that we must be particularly committed and give as much attention as possible from our member states. But I also have to highlight today that quite clearly many other places exist where conflicts are taking place. Gaza, in particular, there are thousands of children who have lost their lives, thousands of children who are being bombed up till today, and my group today would like to be able to say here that all children must be protected wherever the conflict might be taking place, and the interest of the child is always what's most important. We have seen these practices going on that are completely diametrically opposed to international law, such as the Geneva Convention, the European Convention on Human Rights, and the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. We condemn, of course, all of those atrocities. We call upon all to implement everything necessary to actually make real what was declared in the Reykjavik Declaration, calling on the Russian Federation to immediately release all civilians forcibly transferred or illegally deported to the territories of the Russian Federation or to areas temporarily controlled or occupied by the Russian Federation, especially children. Beyond that, beyond the work that we're doing that we will continue to engage in, which is so essential, we must also find a voice, create conditions so that this conflict comes to an end, to find a way to be able to ensure that the Russian aggressor stop its acts of aggression beyond the texts that we draft here in our Assembly. We must create conditions in our member states throughout the world so that these conflicts, which are endangering the lives of thousands and thousands of children, come to an end. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Fernandez. Now the floor goes to Mrs. Camila Fabricius. The floor is yours.
Thank you for the word, Mr. President. Thank you for a very significant report for the responsibility for the situation for Ukrainian children prompted by Russia's aggressive warfare. Children are always losers in war. And with this report, we would like to acknowledge the significant work by Madam Momenko has done. Children have the right in themselves, and the lives of Ukrainian children are threatened every day by the aggression of Russia. It is unacceptable that Ukrainian children are taken hostage in a war in which they have no stake. Ukrainian children are the losers. If I should point out a couple of essential things that is important for us, is the section 14.3 highlights collaboration with organizations as which Red Cross and UNICEF. This collaboration should happen unhindered and would secure access to the children. It is also important for us that orphan children are to the greatest intention possible to be ensured that they have their siblings. Being in contact with your brother or sister is something that child organizations consider as virtual for child upbringing. In a world where everything is uncertain, where some have lost both their home, their parents, their country, their nationality. It's crucial to have one's siblings and have the opportunity to know them. Thank you for listening and make the room for this, Mrs. Rapporteur. And once more, thank you for the great job. It has been a hard job. And what Mrs. Zelenska said, children is the future. Thank you for the floor.
Thank you very much. Now, the first of the speaker list, and not speaking on behalf of political groups, is Mrs. Tula Atainen. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, a concrete and sad picture of Russia's brutal war has destroyed the normal lives of Ukrainian children. And this picture has been drawn before us. One child lost is one too many. Because of this war, too many children have sustained permanent injury or lost their loved ones. Too many families have fallen apart and people have had to leave their homes. The educational path of millions of children and young people has been endangered. As a former Minister for Education in Finland, I want to emphasize the importance of a safe school and early education on the well-being of children. The right to education also applies to children living amid war and conflict. Therefore, we must ensure education for all children of Ukraine. Dear colleagues, I am shocked by Russia's forcible removals and the Russification of Ukrainian children. Forced removals, reluctance to restore family links, and using children as instruments of propaganda is completely unacceptable. It only strengthens our picture of Russia's cowardice and blatant disregard for the rules and human values. I strongly condemn the weaponization of children by Russia. Children are subjects of special protection in humanitarian law, as it is stated in Geneva Conventions, as well as in the UN Convention of the Right of Child and its additional protocol. The children of Ukraine must be immediately returned in respect of international law and basic human rights. Dear colleagues, millions of Ukrainians have fled internally and externally. Finland has received tens of thousands of Ukrainian mothers and children. For us, it is essential that children are quickly enrolled in school and early education and offer psychosocial support. The sense of security of children consists of routines and daily structures. We must never forget the children of Ukraine. We all have a joint responsibility to offer them care and safety. This can only be done by concrete action. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Now the floor goes to Mrs. Jasko. The floor is yours.
Dear colleagues, it's so hard to talk about this topic. It's so hard to listen and to know the numbers, but they are all human lives. It's so hard to think about what I want to say to you today, also by being a mother myself, how hard it is to look at the children's eyes every time when Ukraine is bombed. Today we talk about the biggest tragedies, but there are tragedies that may be called in a different way, but there are also tragedies. Many children of Ukraine are currently being away from their parents or from one of their parents. Many lose their relatives, but not being deported, but just because of the war.
And it's so hard to know that, unfortunately, as our First Lady said today, that we have around only 400 cases that are successful cases when children were returned. But what about almost 20,000? What about the mechanisms? What about the future? If you ask me what you can do, please try to engage your governments to help us really with negotiations. Yes, unfortunately, it may take up to 50 years or even more to solve that. And meantime, Russia is taking these children, and many of them are not only being sent to the front line, they are being recruited to their secret services. They are being recruited against all the humanity, all humanitarian values that we are fighting for here. What you can do, you can sponsor any of the recovery projects for children, but please sponsor them and help them long term. You can also train the specialists. One fact, in our delegation, 4 of us became mothers or gave a birth to children already when the war has started. So you can imagine how is it for us. And for us, it's incredibly personal, political and humanitarian to make possible that we have some political solutions. Let's leave it not only in the text, but please try to sponsor and help more projects for Ukrainian children. It was mentioned the prosthetics. Children need to have hands and legs. It's not that hard to arrange that. If you help only one child, you'll bring much more joy and light and love, which is so much needed and that is very often forgotten somehow. Please do it.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Jasko. Now, next on the list is Mrs. Pablo Sushko. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President, dear colleagues. Today, I would like to bring to your attention the incredible resilience of the children and families of Ukraine during the war. Despite intense battles, missile strikes, and drone attacks for over 20 months, 94% of them continue to attend classes, either in person, online, or mixed learning. But it is not easy to visit schools for them. Because of air alarms, children and staff have to organize lessons in school shelters. Still, parents generally raise the success and quality of education, the education of teachers, and the strength of the education system. Strength of the Ukrainian people in difficult times is truly impressive. In Kharkiv, the city close to the border with Russia, the first underground school for 900 kids is being built. Also, special education facilities make sure that children continue to study even during shelling in the city metro. However, there are psychological challenges in kids' behavior. As parents report, children's fears and signs of distress. Many children are afraid of loud sounds, show irritability. They don't show full signs of post-traumatic stress disorder, but the impact of the war affects them in different ways. The survey reveals concerning long-term effects of psychological trauma and grief, especially among teenagers who have fear about the future. Anyway, despite all the challenges of the war, resilience becomes a trend among teenagers who show strength, confidence, and the ability to stay calm in adversity. 86% of teenagers see their future only in Ukraine, and all of them believe in the victory of Ukraine. In conclusion, let us support the resilient children of Ukraine. Together we must act to ensure their proper education, medical, social, and psychological support, and a safe future. Let's stand together in solidarity with the children of Ukraine. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now the floor next on the list is Mrs. Anna Kristina Mikkonen. The floor is yours, Mrs. Mikkonen.
Your Excellency, Ms. Zelenska, dear Mr. President, dear colleagues. Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine has caused a fundamental change in the security environment of Europe. It has also endangered the lives of millions of children in Ukraine. The biggest price of war is always paid by the persons in vulnerable situations, especially children. The forced transfers of civilians, including children from Ukraine, and their illegal adoptions in Russia are particularly shocking. The amount of children deported and/or forcibly displaced persons is now 19,546. The amount is incomprehensible. The deportations are grave violations of rights of the child and international law and should be pursued as war crimes. Russia must be held accountable for its violations of international law, including reparations for damage caused by its wrongful acts. Mr. President, Ukraine is Finland's largest development cooperation partner and recipient of Finnish humanitarian aid. Children who had to leave their homes in Ukraine are now going to school in Finland. The essential need for these children is to receive education and healthcare, including mental health support that are tailored to their specific situation, to maintain their connections with their language and culture, which will facilitate their future return to Ukraine, taking into account the best interest of the child. I greatly appreciate the efforts of Her Excellency Ms. Zelenska in protecting the rights and lives of children in Ukraine. Finland will stand with Ukraine and continue to support it and its children for as long as is needed. Slava Ukraini!
Thank you very much. Now the floor goes to Mrs. Mariana Balic. Maybe she's not in the chamber. So the next on the list is Mrs. Pakosta from Estonia. Is Mrs. Pakosta?
Yeah, here.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Honourable members of the PACE, today we stand here together with an urgent appeal deeply rooted in the values of the Council of Europe, the principles of human rights, democracy and the rule of law. Currently, we are facing a very grave situation that demands our immediate and unified action. In the recent times, we have witnessed the harrowing plight of the Ukrainian children forcibly deported from their homeland to Russia and Belarus. We cannot forget that these innocent children have been deeply traumatized and have had to experience violence, trauma, destruction and displacement for a very long time. The tragedy is so vast that we even do not know the exact number of deported children. The aim of this criminal Russian policy is to forcibly change the children's identity and assimilate them in order to make them to forget about their homeland, Ukraine, and not to be able to return to their loved ones. The Parliament of Estonia, the Riigikogu, like Latvia and Saima, takes a firm stand against these atrocities. We are condemning the systematic, deliberate actions of Russia and Belarus in this unlawful deportation, as well as Russia's decision to grant citizenship to Ukrainian children under a simplified procedure. We recognize the urgent need to restore these children to their rightful homes, to reunite them with their families, and to rekindle the hope of the peaceful future. This is a call to action for all European parliaments to join hands in a unified response. We must stand together to condemn these acts, to demand the immediate release and safe return of these innocent children to Ukraine. Therefore, we all must acknowledge and support the International Criminal Court's efforts to bring those responsible to justice, in particular the arrest warrants issued on the 17th of March last year for Vladimir Putin and Russia's Children's Rights Commissioner Maria Lvova-Belova. Let us not forget that impunity only breeds more injustice. It's in our duty, in the spirit of the values that bind us as members of the PACE, to ensure that such atrocities do not go unpunished. I urge you, as fellow guardians of democracy and human rights, to take similar actions in your own parliaments. Let us adopt resolutions that echo the Parliament of Estonia and the same of Latvia. Let us call for the cessation of these heinous acts and for the restoration of peace and order. Let us support the 10-point peace plan proposed by the President of Ukraine, Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky, which includes the return of children deported to Russia and Belarus and serves as a beacon of hope in these dark times. Together, we have the power to make a difference. Together, we can stand as a formidable force against the violation of human rights. Thank you, and let's act from our side as Olena Zelenska asked us to act together.
Thank you very much. Now the floor goes to Mrs. Esther Mieli. The floor is yours.
Eccoci.
Thank you, President. Ladies and gentlemen, I listened with great attention to previous speakers, and I very much welcome the reasonable and sensible words I've heard. Yesterday in the Italian Senate, we adopted on the extension of the rules necessary for providing civilian and military equipment to the authorities in Ukraine. Ukraine supports Ukraine. We are with Ukraine. We want to see fairness. On Tuesday, we saw an exhibition in which we were able to look at pictures, paintings and personal objects from Ukrainian children. There are 14 different stories of the Ukrainian children who've been subjected to this war, who have been affected by the horrific bombings, the deportations, the threats to their lives, the loss of their families. These children have gone through horror, and it's quite unacceptable. Italy has chosen its side. We've done this with an eye on justice and in recognition of the fact that we cannot live in a world where those that bomb civilian infrastructure can remain unpunished. So Ukraine can count on Italian support, unconditional support. And we, in Italy, in 2025, will be organising the Ukraine Recovery Conference so as to ensure that the people of Ukraine have a future. We want to help contribute to the social and economic rebirth of the country. I would like to thank those responsible for the report and for the amendments which we'll be supporting. I would also like to thank everybody who's worked on all the relevant documents.
Grazie.
Thank you, Mrs. Mieli. Now the floor goes to Yuri Kamelchuk from Ukraine. The floor is yours. He's not here. So next on the list is Mr. Bjarni Johnson. The floor is yours.
Mr. President, it is of utmost importance to facilitate and take effective action to help locate and secure the safe return of deported and forcibly transferred Ukrainian children to their families. Furthermore, we also need to put focus on the well-being of Ukrainian children hosted in our member states and provide them with necessary assistance, such as access to good health care and education, including with Ukraine itself. There is an urgent need to facilitate the coordination between Ukrainian authorities, relevant international organizations, civil society, and other stakeholders. It has been estimated that since the start of the aggression of the Russian regime against Ukraine, over 3.8 million children have been forced to flee Ukraine, with most of them residing in Council of Europe member states. In an historic unanimous vote on the 5th of June last year, the Icelandic Parliament, Alþingi, passed a resolution condemning the illegal deportation of Ukrainian children. It is the determination and position of the Alþingi that Russian authorities should immediately cease the deportation of children, as it violates international humanitarian law and constitutes a war crime, as has recently been reiterated in the declaration of the Reykjavik Summit. At the same time, it must be ensured by all available means that children who have been transferred to Russia or Belarus or within the occupied areas of Ukraine be immediately returned to their parents or other guardians under the supervision of the international community, and that Russian authorities and other perpetrators be held accountable. With the passage of this parliamentary resolution, the members of Alþingi responded to the appeal of Ukraine that the Alþingi condemn the illegal and systematic deportation of Ukrainian children, and thereby reiterate its solidarity and support for the Ukrainian people. We were the first of the member states to produce such a statement, and now Latvian Parliament Saima has done the same last December. I want to encourage others to follow our example. I want to use the opportunity to thank Olena Komenko, Maria Mercenseva, and Yevgenia Kravchuk for valuable help and encouragement for me drafting that important resolution for Alþingi. We must find out about the whereabouts of these Ukrainian children, even though the Russian regime will not cooperate. We must do our utmost to get the abducted Ukrainian children reunited with their families and relatives. It is unacceptable that these children are being torn from their families and stripped of their identity and future. We must do everything in our power to take back the life of these children and their families, and to make the Russian regime answer to these cruel acts of war crime.
Thank you very much. Now the floor goes to Mrs. Ovchaniokova. Sorry if I pronounce this bad. Is she?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, the floor is yours.
Your Excellency, Madam Zelenska, dear Mr. President, dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you very much, Madam Rapporteur, for your excellent job and excellent report. Since ancient time, it has been so that invader, wanting to destroy his opponent, start with his children. Kidnapping and deportation of children were practiced during all wars. The enemy is clearly aware that children are the future. They are the nation gene pool. Erasing children's nation identity means destroying the nation. This is exactly what Russia is doing now, forcibly deporting our children, separating them from their parents, from their families, without leaving them any choice. So when children are taken forcibly to Russia, the Ukrainian names are replaced to Russian ones. They are taught Russian song, Russian history, and racist anti-Ukrainian ideology. 2 minutes hate that is style of their upbringing and education in Russia. According to the National Information Bureau, more than 19,000 children were deported or forcibly relocated. On its resources, Russia calls its number 744,000. Let me remind you about the children who remained in occupied territory in Donetsk and Luhansk, in Crimea. There are another 1 million children whose identity Russian propaganda is trying to erase. Moreover, some of these children have already become young men, and now being raised in Russian propaganda, they have joined to the enemy. Can you imagine the whole tragedy of the situation? Children who fight against the state, against the nation, against the brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers. Orwell's classic. Propaganda works. The illegal deportation of Ukrainian children is a direct violation of the Geneva Convention, a war crime. The return of the children of Ukraine is point 4 of peace formula of President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. Ukraine has already managed to return 570 children, and this small victory would be impossible without our partners, without their support and mediation, for which we are infinitely grateful. So currently, active work in this area is only intensifying the international coalition for return of Ukrainian children and bring kids back UA. International Task Force was created due to the initiative of our president. But let us just think, if we return every day, as I say, our First Lady, we have necessary 55 years. So not only return physically, but also mentally. So we have to put all our efforts, international efforts, into carrying them from the love of evil. Only the global community efforts may accelerate the enormously difficult process. We will never stop until every Ukrainian who was unlawfully deported to Russia is returned home as quickly as possible, and all war criminals receive severe punishment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now the next is, and the last, I'm sorry, I've got to cut the list, we got to interrupt. The next is Mr. Goncharenko. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, for Rapporteur, for great work done. And you know, I want to speak about culture. I think you will be surprised. We're speaking about children now. Yeah, I want to speak about culture. Because sometimes from you and in Europe I hear, oh, we know great Russian culture. And unfortunately, we don't know much about Ukrainian culture. I just want to explain you some things. I respect cultures of all nations. I want to explain you something. You know the names Gogol, Malevich, world-known writer Gogol, world-known painter Malevich. But many of you think they are Russians. They are not. They are Ukrainians. But Russians did everything they can to make from these Ukrainians Russians, like from millions in generations and in generations. And from those whom they can't make Russians, they just kill them. They just kill them. From these hundreds and hundreds of Ukrainian children which were killed, there were poets and composers and painters who will never become. And that's why you know not much about Ukrainian great culture. Because our painters are killed, because our poets are killed, because our writers are killed by Russia. That's something you should know. And from other children, from other Ukrainians, they just try to make Russians. And that is a genocide. And we need to call genocide as it is. But what we are doing, we are making resolutions. I thank you for this resolution. This is important. But at the same time, when we are saying here that Putin is a war criminal and there is a warrant issued against him because of the crime of genocide, I see the photo of Secretary General of United Nations Guterres hugging with Lavrov yesterday in the United Nations. We are saying here, Russia is killing you. And at the same time, Slovakian Prime Minister Fico is saying there is no war in Kiev. Mr. Orban is coming to Putin, Hungarian Prime Minister. There is no war in Kiev and Ukraine. This night, my 5-year-old son spent with his mother, my wife, in the shelter. 400 meters from my home, there was a drone attack. There are people wounded again and again and again. And I just want to ask you one thing. When you will come back to your national parliaments, at least make a resolution condemning Russian genocide against Ukraine. And just remember one thing. A body of an 8-year-old girl, which was killed in Kharkiv 2 days ago, which was taken from the rubble of her house. She would be the great painter, the great writer, the great poet, but she would never be anymore. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Goncharenko. As I said, I must now interrupt the list of speakers. The speeches of members on the speakers list who have been present during the debate but have not been able to speak may be given to the table office for publication in the official report. I remind colleagues that typewritten text must be submitted electronically no later than 4 hours after the list speaker is interrupted. I call Mr. Komenko, rapporteur, to reply to the debate. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, I will be short. Dear colleagues, I will be short, and I'm grateful for all your support, all your words that you said today. And I'm grateful to each of you for what your countries, parliaments, and governments have already done for Ukrainian children. Our children have found refuge and safety in the member states of the Council of Europe and receiving comprehensive support from your countries. Thank you for that. I hope that this support will not fade away, but rather increase, because every Ukrainian child has been affected by the war and continues to face hardships every day. The resolution we are voting on today concerns every Ukrainian child, regardless of whether they are in Ukraine or have found refuge in your countries. We have covered every problem of a Ukrainian child and proposed concrete steps on how we all together can help them, can help Ukrainian children, can help our children. Adopt resolutions to condemn Russia for war crimes, including for crime of genocide. Please put pressure on Russia to return our children through all possible instruments and support us in other international fora. Demand justice for perpetrators. Apply sanctions against everyone engaged in the deportation of Ukrainian children. Support Ukrainian children by all means, ensuring their access to health care and education. Help Ukraine win. I urge everyone to support the resolution and follow the concrete steps to make a difference. We must act together and act fast, because time is running out. Thank you, dear colleagues.
Thank you, Mrs. Komenko. Monsieur Monquin, do you wish to speak as chair of the committee? Please, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry?
On behalf of the Committee of the Social Affairs, Sustainable Development and Health, I would like to recall what we're talking about today. We're talking about the very worst things that happen in wars. We're talking about the war of Russian aggression, children's lives, wounded children, deported children, and I'm emphasizing this word deported, children that are traumatized and will go on being for years and decades, even if we're aware of how strong and resilient the Ukrainian people are. We cannot normalize this situation, which is dreadful. I'd like to thank Ms. Zelenska, who put her finger right on the importance of coordinating and continuing to support these millions of displaced Ukrainians inside their country and abroad. And I must also thank Ms. Komenko for the immense investment she has made in this work for many months, the energy she has put into it, the links that she has created, so that we go on being totally aware of this horrible reality. Let me say that we are in 2024, and we are using the word deportation again, which particularly in French calls us back to the very darkest hours of our continent and should make us aware of the reality that is that of Ukraine today, and particularly that of forced transfers. In Paris, on December 15th, we organized an ad hoc committee with very impressive people from Ukrainian NGOs, but also journalists who are doing incredible work to document these horrors, and put together a documentary where we saw the systematic character of these forced transfers of children. And today I would like to recall to you that there are 2 realities. The first is urgency, the emergency situation. The Ukrainian First Lady told us how urgent this was, and it's urgent because these children are in an incredible psychological state of mind, but also because Putin and their regime are brainwashing them, and it is urgent to find a solution to that. And then another element we need to think of is how to bring these children back home. And here I think the work that Ms. Kamenko is doing together with the people we've met in Paris, there are ways forward. And I think this list of children must be clarified. We need international organizations and bodies to help Ukrainians to put together a very clear list. And I think that's another emergency matter. And then finally, by way of conclusion, our assembly cannot just stop here. We have started work that must go on. This is only the beginning of a long fight for the Ukrainian people. I should like also to say we're not only talking about Ukrainian children, I said this to Olena, we're also talking about children of the Council of Europe. We're talking about the children of our values, the children who are building the future of this continent, a fair, free, and democratic future. And I'd also remind you today, the situation is being normalized, the situation that the Ukrainian people are being 40 people killed on a market, 40 people. We must remain as indignant as we were the first day of the invasion of Crimea. We must remain indignant and support the Ukrainian people, be they children or the whole Ukrainian people. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mukke. So the debate is closed. The Committee on Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development has presented a draft resolution, document 15901, to which 12 amendments have been tabled, and draft recommendation, document 15901, to which no amendments have been tabled. There's a point of order.
In a spirit of trying to be helpful in view of the timescale, would it be possible to take many of these amendments en bloc, provided the rapporteur and the chairman are in agreement? If there's any amendments they disagree with, we can vote on them. But if everyone is in agreement, the rapporteur and chairman of the committee in particular, and no member objects, could we possibly take them en bloc?
That is happening. This is what is happening.
I apologise. Great minds think alike.
Thank you. I understand that the chairperson of the Committee on Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development wishes to propose to the Assembly that amendments 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 4 and 3 to the draft resolution, document 15901, which were unanimously approved by the Committee, should be declared as agreed by the Assembly. Is that so, Mr. Mutke?
Monsieur le Président, oui.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President.
Does anyone object? If so, please ask for the floor by raising your hand. There's no objection. So I declare the amendments 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 4 and 3 to the draft resolution be agreed. We will now consider the amendments, remaining amendments individually. The amendments will be taken in the order in which they appear in the compendium. I remind you that speeches on the amendments are limited to 30 seconds. Page 9. I call Mrs. Zampa to support Amendment 6. You have 30 seconds.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. In this amendment, we are asking parliaments of member states to strengthen the political support they are given and to bring about this plan for humanitarian response that I discussed in my remarks. We consider that $4.2 billion are necessary so as to make this plan a reality. And we would like to have the member states take on their part and to do this as a matter of urgency. Thank you.
I've been informed that Mr. Friede wishes to propose an oral sub-amendment as follows. Replace the words round $4.2 billion with the words between $4 billion and $5 billion. In my opinion, this oral sub-amendment is in order under our rules. However, do 10 or more members object to the oral sub-amendment being debated? No. Fewer than 10 members object to the sub-amendment being debated. Therefore, I call Mr. Fride to support his oral sub-amendment. You have 30 seconds, but yeah. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be speaking French. Our goal here is to strengthen somewhat this amendment, because mentioning a figure of 4.2 billion, I think, is a bit too precise, and that's why I would like to suggest estimations can suggest that some amount between 4 and 5 billion will be necessary. That gives us a bit more margin for maneuver in a situation which will, in any case, require a lot of money, although we don't know exactly how much.
Does anyone wish to speak against the sub-amendment? What is the opinion of Mrs. Zampa?
Io sono a favore di questo.
I am in favor of the sub-amendment.
What is the opinion of the committee?
La Commission a approuvé une large...
The committee approved the sub-amendment by a large majority.
Very well. Now, I shall now put the sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open. I call for the result to be displayed. Okay, the sub-amendment is agreed. No. Now we come to the main amendment 6, as amended. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? No. What is the view of the committee? Mouquin? Monsieur Mouquin? You're right. Okay.
La Commission a approuvé la...
The committee approved the amendment as modified.
Now put the amendment to the vote, and the vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Amendment 6 is agreed. So I call Mrs. Zanda Kalnina Lukasevica to support Amendment 1. Is she here? Yeah. Please, Mrs.
Yes, we would like to put it on a vote and to support it, as Ukrainian children have left Ukraine to get temporary protection, and they're not refugees, so they are not under the subject of the Article 6 of Convention, because it sees that a country in getting a refugee status are logically united by a common reason, that is the threat coming from the country of habitual residence. It's not from threat from the Ukraine by Russia. So we instead ask Article 6 of Convention shall not apply to the Ukrainian children, and Article 5 of the Convention to be applied following mentioned above. So I ask to support this amendment.
Does anyone else wish to support this amendment? No? So does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? No? So what is the opinion of the committee?
L'amendement a été...
The amendment was rejected by more than 2/3.
Okay, I shall now put the amendment on the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call the result to be displayed.
The amendment is adopted.
The amendment is adopted.
Page 18.
Amendment 2, I call Mrs. Kalnina Lukasevica to support Amendment 2. You have 30 seconds. Sorry, I was thinking you were. I'm sorry. So does anyone else to support this amendment?
Nope.
Nobody? Okay. Does anyone wish to speak?
Amendment falls.
The amendment falls. Sorry.
goal is to ensure that member states do not
No, I'm sorry, the amendment is already full. We passed to the oral amendment. I have received, as said, an oral amendment from Mrs. Olena Komenko, which reads as follows. In paragraph 18 on the draft resolution, delete the word ICRC and instead the word United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, UNICEF. United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, and other competent United Nations agency, and the International Committee of the Red Cross. The President may accept an oral amendment on the grounds of promoting clarity, accuracy, and conciliation, and if there is not opposition from 10 or more members to it being debated. In my opinion, the oral amendment meets the criteria of Rule 34.7(a). Is there any opposition to the amendment being debated? There is not. I therefore call Mrs. Komenko to support oral amendment. You have 30 seconds.
Dear colleagues, I would like to support my oral sub-amendment. We are open, Ukraine and this organization, to cooperate with any international organization whose mandate suppose helping children. So we suggest to expand this paragraph with other international organizations and harmonize the resolutions in accordance with the paragraph 14.3. There are organizations listed who can deal with immediate and safe access to the children. Thank you, dear colleagues. And I would like to also support Mr. President. My colleague, she is the co-author of the amendment 2, and this amendment is about.
I'm sorry, that amendment passed, so we got to talk about this. I'm sorry.
So, but she was about to support the amendment.
I'm sorry.
She was about to support the amendment. It's about official representatives that your countries, your official representatives should not participate in propaganda campaigns initiated, organized by Russia.
Sorry, I have a point of order.
Point of order.
Je suis désolé, Monsieur le Président.
Apologies. I have every respect for this, but this is an urgent debate, and the committee met this morning, and therefore I think that our colleague who wishes to defend these amendments didn't have much time, and we were rather quick in the vote. I'm sorry, I understand this, but I think, but out of respect for the topic, in my view, we should be able to vote on this amendment, and I will give you the when you give me the floor, I'll tell you the opinion of the.
So, does anyone to wish against the oral amendment? Nobody. The committee is obviously in favor, I think.
La commission est à l'unanimité.
The committee is in favor, unanimously in favor.
To the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The oral amendment is agreed.
Point of order, Mr. President.
You can't have a point of order during the vote.
Time for the voting. This is just a run for the vote.
Sorry, everyone voted, so there was plenty of time. The amendment is agreed. The oral amendment is agreed. We will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 15901 as amended. A simple majority is required. The vote is now open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The draft resolution in document 15901 as amended is adopted. We will now proceed to vote on the draft recommendation contained in document 15901. A two-thirds majority is required. Two-thirds. The voting is now open. Vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The draft recommendation in document 15901 is adopted.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, now it is a pleasure for me to welcome among us Mrs. Dominique Hasler, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Education and Sport of Liechtenstein and President of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe, for a communication about the activities and priorities of the Liechtenstein Presidency of the Committee of Ministers. The presentation will be followed by an exchange of views with parliamentarians. Madam President, from the outset, let me underline how much we at the Parliamentary Assembly in general, and I in particular, appreciate and value the institutional cooperation with the Committee of Ministers. Drawing on the example of my predecessor, Tini Cox, I intend to continue and further expand this cooperation, bearing also in mind the spirit and recommendations of the Fourth Summit Declaration. The year ahead of us will be important for the whole organization. 2024 will mark the 75th anniversary of the Council of Europe and the first anniversary of the Reykjavik Summit, where historic decisions were taken by our heads of states and government. A time to draw lessons, a time to look forward to the future. Your country will be more than ever at the center of Europe, not only geographically speaking, but above all symbolically. As you recently declared, being geographically a small state, membership in the Council of Europe has, and I quote, helped to further secure Liechtenstein's sovereignty and to extend its international recognition as an independent state. It has also contributed both to the development of new European standards and to the protection of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law in all Europe. You can be certain that Liechtenstein will continue to contribute to these important efforts as an active member of the Council of Europe. I would like to wish you every success in fulfilling the important tasks ahead, and you can rest assured that our Parliamentary Assembly will continue to do its utmost to work in synergy with the Committee of Ministers, as we did with the previous presidencies. Minister Hasler, Madam President, it is my pleasure to give you the floor.
Dear President of the Parliamentary Assembly, dear Secretary General of the Parliamentary Assembly, dear Secretary General of the Council of Europe, dear members of the Parliamentary Assembly, Excellencies, dear colleagues. Before I start my remarks, I would like to extend my congratulations to Mr. O'Flaherty on his appointment as the new Commissioner for Human Rights. I wish Mr. O'Flaherty success in carrying out the important mission of the Commissioner in the coming 6 years. Let me also express my gratitude to Madame Dunja Mijatovic for making the best use of her platform to advocate for the rights of victims of human rights violations and other vulnerable groups. I also want to thank Mr. Tiny Knox for the remarkable work he has done over the past 2 years as President of the Parliamentary Assembly, and congratulate the newly elected President, Mr. Rousopoulos. I am assured that under his leadership, the Assembly and the Committee of Ministers will continue their fruitful cooperation in making the Council of Europe's voice heard and in ensuring compliance with our democratic principles and human rights. Dear members of the Parliamentary Assembly, it is my honor to address the Parliamentary Assembly in this week's part session in my capacity as the President of the Committee of Ministers. In November, I already had the pleasure of addressing the members of your standing committee in our capital in Vaduz. In my speech today, I would like to give you an overview of our priorities and current developments. Liechtenstein took over the presidency of the Committee of Ministers in November, for the 3rd time since we joined the Council of Europe more than 45 years ago. It is an immense privilege and at the same time a challenge to hold the presidency right now. Over the last year, we have often heard that we currently find ourselves at the crossroad. The values of the Council of Europe, human rights, democracy, and the rule of law face multiple threats. The present seems to be characterized by aggressive power politics, anti-democratic tendencies, growing nationalism and disregard for the rule of law and the rules-based international order. History teaches us that all of these developments have the potential to lead to immeasurable human suffering, suffering that can be avoided. Particularly in times like this, the Council of Europe and its core principles prove not only important, but urgently necessary. Liechtenstein is actively committed to continue its work for the protection and promotion of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law during its presidency. With our common recommitment to the Council of Europe and to its core principles, our heads of state and government at the 4th Summit of the Council of Europe sent an important signal in Reykjavik in May last year. Liechtenstein will continue the work undertaken by the Latvian presidency to ensure that Reykjavik was not an end in itself, but the beginning of a process of renewal and strengthening for our organization. The 75th anniversary of the Council of Europe that we are celebrating this year is taking place under the same motto that brought our leaders together in Reykjavik: united around our values. The Committee of Ministers translated these words into concrete terms when it adopted a strong and even historic budget for 2024 until 2027. In the first meeting of the ministers' deputies under the Liechtenstein presidency by consensus. The budget reflects the priorities and direction given by the summit and provides significant additional means for their implementation. It is the first budget in 17 years with a real increase in financing over and above inflation. The pledge to continue to strengthen the cooperation and political dialogue with the Parliamentary Assembly has been given effect, in particular through the allocation of additional funding to the Assembly. In this context, the Committee of Ministers welcomed the Assembly's contribution to the budget process and notably its intention to mainstream the Reykjavik agenda into Assembly activities. In line with the commitment of our heads of state and government, a real increase in resources was also decided for the European Court of Human Rights. The court acts as the principal safeguard to protect our values and to guarantee that Europe remains a continent of democratic societies guided by the rule of law. As member states, it is our obligation to ensure the full, effective and prompt execution of all judgments of the court and to respect its case law. In this context, let me also refer to the human rights meeting of the Committee of Ministers that took place last December and was devoted to the supervision of the execution of judgments of the European Court of Human Rights. At that meeting, the committee examined a large number of cases covering many issues in various member states. In the case of Kavala versus Turkey, the applicant remains detained despite the judgments of the European Court of Human Rights and repeated calls for his immediate release. The case is under the committee's close scrutiny. And its regular meeting on the 17th of January, the committee adopted a new decision which should allow for high-level technical contacts to take place in the first part of February this year. Following our constructive and results-oriented dialogue, I trust that the Turkish authorities will be committed to delivering results. For the credibility of the convention systems and the organization, this organization as a whole, it is imperative that all member states fulfill their obligation to implement the judgments of the court. Reykjavik was also the opportunity for our leaders to express their full support to Ukraine and to firmly condemn the illegal war of aggression launched by the Russian Federation. In the face of the many crimes committed and the countless difficulties imposed on them by Russia, the Ukrainian authorities and people continue to demonstrate a courage and determination that commands respect. From the outset of the aggression, the Council of Europe wanted to provide as much assistance as possible. This with a series of initiatives aiming to support Ukraine in its fight for freedom and justice and to hold the Russian Federation to account. The establishment of the Register of Damage for Ukraine in Reykjavik last year was a critical first step to this end. The register will serve as a record of evidence and claims information on all damages caused by the Russian Federation in Ukraine. As such, the register is a strong first step towards an international compensation mechanism for victims of the Russian aggression. I commend the extensive preparatory work that has been undertaken in the last few months to make the register fully operational. The newly elected board of the register held its inaugural meeting in December, and it is expected that claims will begin to be submitted in the spring. To date, 43 states and the European Union have joined the register. Among those joining, we have Canada, Japan, and the United States. The Liechtenstein presidency will continue to advocate for broader membership in the register. In this context, we have already commenced outreach activities, with which we hope to encourage states outside the Council of Europe to join our important efforts to ensuring justice. Along this, the Council of Europe is pursuing the implementation of the most ambitious Ukraine action plan entitled Resilience, Recovery and Reconstruction. The activity is carried out in a wide range of fields such as constitutional justice, anti-corruption, democratic governance, and media freedom. The situation of the children in Ukraine remains particularly worrying. In the light of the grave circumstances they face, the declaration on the situation of children of Ukraine was adopted by the heads of states and government in Reykjavik. As a follow-up to the declaration and with the funds provided by the Action Plan on Ukraine, the consultation group on the children of Ukraine has been set up to serve as a multilateral platform to exchange information and to foster discussions about policies affecting Ukrainian children residing in other Council of Europe member states. During its first meeting here in Strasbourg last month, the consultation group on children of Ukraine brought together over 85 participants to discuss ways to effectively protect the rights of the millions of children who have been forced to flee Ukraine and are now residing in other Council of Europe member states. While the mandate of the consultation group does not cover the unlawful transfer and deportation of Ukrainian children to the Russian Federation, to Belarus, or to the areas temporarily controlled or occupied by Russia, the Council of Europe, together with its member states and the newly established international coalition, remains committed to finding solutions that enable the immediate and safe return of these children. With regards to the Russian Federation, the Committee of Ministers is actively working with the UN bodies to remind Russia of its unconditional legal obligation to implement the judgments by the Strasbourg Court. In that context, the committee held an exchange of views in December 23 with the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Russia. Ukraine is unfortunately not the only country in our organization to see its right to territorial integrity violated by the Russian aggression. The same is true of Georgia. On the 31st October, in the context of the continuing deterioration of the human rights situation in the Georgian regions Abkhazia and South Ossetia, the ministers' deputies took a series of decisions and recalled once again that the measures taken by de facto authorities supported by the Russian Federation in these areas violates Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The minister's deputy also approved an action plan for Georgia for 2024 until 2027, the aim of which is to better harmonize Georgia's legislation, institutions, and practice with European standards in the fields of human rights, the rule of law, and democracy. At the fourth summit, our heads of state and government committed to ensuring a leading role for the Council of Europe in developing standards in the digital era, to safeguard human rights online and offline, including by finalizing as a priority the Council of Europe's Framework Convention on Artificial Intelligence. This work is progressing well, and the Committee of Ministers is expecting to adopt a new convention still during our presidency. We count on the Parliamentary Assembly assistance in achieving this goal. At the fourth summit of heads of state and government and in the Reykjavik Declaration, our leaders also underlined the pioneering role of the Council of Europe in the fight against violence against women and domestic violence. Although we have achieved a lot together, and in this context, let me draw your attention to an event on women in multilateralism taking place later today, there is still much more to do to achieve full and effective gender equality. The dangerous increase of gender-based violence during the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as in conflict situations, serves as a sad reminder of this. With the Istanbul Convention, the Council of Europe has provided us with an international gold standard, and more importantly, the key instrument to effectively and inclusively combat this phenomenon. Liechtenstein is proud to have ratified the Convention 2 years ago and to promote it as one of our priorities for our presidency. Following the recent ratification by Latvia, people in 39 states and in the EU profit of the standards of this important instrument. And I recall the importance of the Istanbul Convention and strongly encourage member states which have not yet done so to sign and ratify the Convention. Dear friends and colleagues, the 75th anniversary of the Council of Europe, we already heard it from the President, provides an important opportunity to demonstrate our common commitment to multilateralism and the principles of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. And as a member states, it is our obligation to do our utmost to safeguard these principles, even though the circumstances are difficult. Let us together remember that the Council of Europe, as the guarantor for these values, proved its capabilities in securing stability and promoting progress in its member states time and time again, ever since it was founded. Through a range of activities and events in Strasbourg and all across Europe, this 75th anniversary will showcase what the Council of Europe means in practical terms for 700 million Europeans who live in our 46 member states. In order to encourage youth participation in the work of the Council of Europe, because they are our future, the Liechtenstein presidency will moreover organize a youth event to enable interested youth from across Europe to add their voice to the work of this organization. Also, speaking as Minister of Education, this priority is close to my heart. The event will take place back-to-back with the ministerial session and the celebrations of the 75th anniversary of the Council of Europe in May. Dear members of this Assembly, let me conclude with going back to the beginning of my speech. At the beginning of my remarks, I stated that we currently find ourselves at the crossroad. The values of the Council of Europe are under threat. The good news is, however, and in this context, let me also refer to yesterday's address of my Prime Minister of Liechtenstein, that it is in our own hands to change this situation. At this crucial crossroad, let us remember that the Council of Europe, as the guarantor of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, proved its capabilities in securing stability and promoting progress in its member states time and time again, ever since it was founded. Multilateralism makes us stronger. Our common values makes us stronger. We need more, not less multilateralism. We must safeguard our common values. And we can only tackle the current challenges if we work together. It is upon us to decide on the path we want to go. Let us choose together the right one. For this, we count on all of your support. I thank you very much for the attention, and I'm now looking forward to receive your valuable questions, and I will do my best to answering the questions specifically. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Thank you, Mrs. Hasler. We will now proceed to the questions. We will first hear questions from the speakers on behalf of the political groups and then hear a response from Mrs. Hasler to those questions. I want to remind the speakers that there is a limit of 30 seconds, and I just remind my colleagues that they should ask only single questions and not make speeches. On behalf of the Social Democrats and Greens, Mr. Stefan Senak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sehr geehrte Frau Außenministerin.
Madam Minister, let me first of all warmly congratulate you on your small but extremely efficient parliamentary reception of our standing committee. Your team was extraordinary, and we were all made to feel very comfortable and welcome in Vaduz. Secondly, a question. You very correctly emphasized that the idea of the degrees handed down by the Court of Human Rights. What should be the next step? What should the Council of Ministers be doing, thinking about the Kavala case? Because the idea of an immediate liberation has not happened. We're simply talking about other things that might conceivably happen.
Mrs. Minister, you have the floor.
Mr. Schenach, first of all, I want to thank you for your question, and let me just do a short remark in German. Ich bedanke mich nochmals bei allen
Let me thank all members of the joint committees that they accepted our invitation to Liechtenstein. It was a very important meeting, and I would like to thank our delegation as well for having made this meeting in Liechtenstein possible.
Coming back now to your questions related to the case Kavala. As I already indicated in my speech, Mr. Kavala remains detained despite the repeated calls of his immediate release and the finding of a violation of Article 46 by the European Court. And of course, the case is under the committee's close scrutiny. I already mentioned that in my speech. In this context, I would like to refer to the human rights meeting of the Committee of Ministers that took place last December, and I was devoted to the CM supervision of the execution of judgments of the European Court of Human Rights. At that meeting, the committee examined a large number of cases covering many issues in various member states. And in the case of Kavala versus Turkey, the applicant remains detained despite the repeated calls for his immediate release and the finding of a violation of Article 46 by the European Court. And again, we have this case under the committee's close scrutiny. At its regular meeting on the 17th January, I also mentioned this in my speech, the committee adopted the new decision which should allow for high-level technical contacts to take place in the first part of February. And we do believe, following our constructive and result-oriented dialogue, that we trust that Turkish authorities will be committed to delivering results. As many of you recall, support for a stronger European Court of Human Rights and more effective execution of its judgments was also one of the key deliverables of the Reykjavik summit. It is also a long-term priority for Liechtenstein and for the credibility of the convention system and the organization as a whole. I already mentioned this also before. It is imperative that all member states fulfill their obligation to implement the judgments of the court.
I call now Mr. Vladimir Vardanyan on behalf of the EPP group to raise his question.
Madam Minister, being a small country in the heart of Europe, what is the Liechtenstein vision of finding the balance between the full respect of our core values and keeping national statehood, tradition and identity, and how in this alarming world small countries may confront external challenges and international threats undermining their security and sovereignty. In this respect, Madam Minister, I am a little bit surprised that in your speech you didn't even mention what's happened in Nagorno-Karabakh, what Azerbaijan did, led to the exodus of population, which is twice bigger than population of your own country. Thank you.
Mrs. Minister, would you like to respond?
Thank you very much, Mr. Vardanyan, for your question. You already raised up a question about small states in Vaduz. I can remember that, so thank you very much for coming back to this important topic. And let me just first answer this question in my national capacity, and I would like to also revert to what our Prime Minister said yesterday. Liechtenstein can be considered to be a small place, but a great one at the same time. And I already mentioned in Vaduz, we do believe as a small state that we have to live the principle of one nation, one vote. And I'm always saying our future should be shaped by the best ideas and not the loudest voices. And perhaps we can also transfer that to being small or big. Every decision is important and everybody has to bring in his expertise wherever it can. It needs everybody at the moment. So I can just underline also once again the importance of all member states within the Council of Europe taking over the responsibility and working very closely together.
On behalf of the European Conservatives, Christopher Chop.
To defy the ruling of the Committee of Ministers following your high-level contacts at the beginning of February. Please, can you answer that question specifically? Because a failure to answer that question suggests that many of your words today, your worthy words, will ring hollow, because meanwhile, Kavala continues to suffer a most horrendous misjustice.
Mrs. Minister, would you like to respond?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much also to Mr. Job for his questions. I think I've already outlined the framework and where we do stand in this process at the moment. And I am aware that on the 13th January 2023, our rapporteurs for the monitoring of Turkey met with various interlocutors in Ankara and with Mr. Kavala himself at Silivri prison. And I welcome this initiative, and I can only repeat the call for Mr. Kavala's immediate release, and the ongoing dialogue must achieve results. There is no step more important for Mr. Kavala and for the convention system. And as I said before, if you ask me to answer the question specifically, I think we do accept now this process, and we will have a view as Minister of Committees on this process. And of course, we will reflect the outcome of the further planned visit, and then looking forward together in a dialogue to find solutions.
On behalf of ALDE, Mr. Bjarni Jonsson.
Madam President, Madam Foreign Minister, no nations have more at stake than international organizations functioning successfully than its smaller members, and that was wisely said by the Icelandic Prime Minister in the spring of 1950 when Iceland became member of Council of Europe. Since then, we have further learned that smaller nations are often more successful in providing true leadership in challenging and trying times, gaining trust and unifying nations, small and large, behind our values. Liechtenstein has indeed proved this during their presidency of Council of Europe. Liechtenstein, focusing on united by our values, labeled 5 main priorities as focus for your presidency. What is your assessment on their progress?
Ms. Minister, would you like to respond?
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson, for your questions. As I said before, the implementation of all the aims we set together at the Reykjavik summit is one of the main priorities during the Liechtenstein presidency. And let me just mention once again, also for me personally, it was really a milestone and a huge importance that we could adapt together such a strong budget by consensus, because without the budget, there is no capacity to implement all those various aims. And I think we do all agree that we need the framework, a good framework, that we are all in our different capacities able to implement the aims. The subgroups of the Committee of Ministers are currently working on the follow-up of the summit and saying that it's really a pragmatical process. We do really set clear goals and clear also timelines so that we can also reflect on what we achieved. We expect to draft the first comprehensive report on the implementation this spring, so there is already a first review. And we do really believe it also builds a basis that we critically look where we stand and learn from the process and give even more energy to go further. But you can be assured that this, as mentioned, is a priority of our presidency.
On behalf of United European Left, Mrs. Sevilei Tsenenko-Jen.
Dear President, dear colleagues, in December 2020, the Grand Chamber of the European Court of Human Rights ruled that the rights and freedoms of Selahattin Demirtas, the former co-chair of the HDP, had been violated and ordered his immediate release. Despite the verdict of the Grand Chamber 3 years ago, Demirtas is still in prison without a conviction. Given the importance of Article 18 dimension of this judgment, why is the Committee of Ministers not initiating infringement proceedings in the Demirtas case? Thank you.
Mrs. Hasler, would you like to respond?
Thank you very much, Ms. Jelling-Ozen. I just want to reply that the committee has expressed profound concern about the situation of Mr. Demirtas, an opposition politician in Turkey at the time. On the 22nd December in 2020, the Grand Chamber of the European Court gave a judgment in case brought by Mr. Demirtas. It found a number of violations of the convention relating to right to liberty and freedom of expression. You meant that too. It established that the applicant's pre-trial detention had pursued the ulterior purpose of stifling pluralism and limiting freedom of political debate, which was at the very, very core of the concept of a democratic society. And under Article 46, the court indicated that the response state was to take all necessary measures to secure the applicant's immediate release. In April 2023, last year, the European Court also found that the detention of the opposition politician and co-leader of the opposition party with Mr. Demirtas, but also with Madame Figen Yüksekdag Sonulu, was in violation of the convention on similar grounds to those in the Demirtas case. Coming back to the Committee of Ministers, we have been regularly examining the cases at its human rights meetings. We do that regularly, and the Turkish authorities have indicated that there is new evidence in the case of Mr. Demirtas which would justify his detention. He has challenged this before the Constitutional Court. And perhaps you just allow me to add 2 further points. At its last human rights meeting, that was in December 23, the committee once again strongly and urged the authorities to ensure the applicant's immediate release, for example, by exploring alternative measures to detention of pending the completion of the proceeding he initiated before the Constitutional Court. It reiterated its invitation to member states, bodies and observer states to raise the issues of the applicants' continuing detention in their contacts with the Turkish authorities and call again for an immediate action to bring it to an end. I can only echo in my role the committee's call for release. The committee will next examine the cases at its upcoming CM meeting in March.
Thank you, Mrs. Hasler. I now give the floor to other speakers and will take them in groups of 3, asking my esteemed colleagues their interventions to be up to 30 seconds. First is Mr. Rino Ronald Buchel.
Geschätzte Frau Ministerin, als
Madam Minister, from our neighboring country, just a few kilometers away from Liechtenstein is where I live, and I'll be speaking German. Dialect might be a bit difficult, but perhaps no one will understand if I speak that way. So, my two questions. First of all, yesterday, our decision on Azerbaijan in the Committee of Ministers, how did that happen? That's my general question. And then my second question, you said that multilateralism, very correctly, makes all of us stronger. And you also very correctly said that it's very important to have this one nation, one vote relationship. But that's not so easy for a small country to live through multilateralism in this way, to do all of that work. Can that really be done in a country that has 40,000 inhabitants? How do you do that? Especially when you have the presidency.
The second in the group of the three colleagues is Mr. Thomas Hasler. As you see, Madam Minister, we have more Haslers today in this room. Mr. Hasler.
Ja,
Thank you. Mr. President, colleagues, I would, on behalf of the Liechtenstein delegation, I would like to thank Foreign Minister Hasler for her presentation today. In these challenging times, the Council of Europe is going to be celebrating its 75th anniversary, and I would like to know what the presidency is planning in this connection. Thank you.
And I now give the floor to Mr. Gabor Banial.
Madam Minister, what is your position on linguistic diversity and the protection of national minorities with regard to the provision of mother tongue education? Thank you for your answer.
Madam Minister, would you like to respond?
Mr. President, thank you very much for giving me the floor, and thank you very much for those also very important questions. I start with answering the question of Mr. Rino Büchel, and just allow me to switch swiftly in German. Wir haben gehört, wir sind...
Yes, you said that we are neighbors. That's quite correct, and I'm very grateful for your questions. Let me perhaps start answering in German before I switch back to English. Let me begin with the question on the role of small countries in multilateralism. I think here we can very clearly refer back to what our head of government said yesterday. I said earlier as well, in the times that we live in, small countries can't simply withdraw and say we're not going to make any contribution, because I believe more than ever a contribution is needed from each and every one of us. And we know we're living in very difficult geopolitical times. And how we experience this as a small country is to say, yes, with our small size, we cannot answer all questions. For me, as foreign minister, together with my diplomatic corps, is to see that we must have expertise in specific areas that we have built up over decades. Unfortunately, these specialized areas such as human rights, democracy, and the rule of law are subjects which the Council of Europe is obliged to roll out in many different areas, more than ever. And we think, therefore, in these areas, we can play an active role as a reliable partner and make our contribution in that way. But it's not possible to be active everywhere on every issue. And so for us, when we're in our role as presidency, our idea is to set the priorities. And in Liechtenstein, we've also seen that we have to deal with this in a pragmatic way. We've emphasized this. The goals that we set and our ability continually to focus on these, and you're hearing from the Sport Minister that I also am. I think it's very important that we set goals and that we meet them together. And that means that we need to have good cooperation between all of our institutions. And we will work together in many, many different files on this with the Parliament, and we're very grateful for that.
Let me swift to the second question which you raised up to the situation on Azerbaijan. there I just want to answer in English. Of course, yes, we are aware about the decision taken yesterday by your assembly not to ratify the credentials of the Azerbaijani delegation. I just want to mention that, of course, this matter has not been yet discussed by the Committee of Ministers. So for me, it's impossible to tell you the views of the committee. I would only like to recall that the role of the Committee of Ministers is there in accordance with the statute of the Council of Europe and in close cooperation with your Assembly and the Secretary General to foster our unity in order to safeguard and promote the ideals we share together. And let me also just look back a little bit. For 75 years, we mentioned the last few days a lot, our anniversary, the Council of Europe has been working to strengthen the unity of European states. It offers a unique platform for multilateral cooperation between the governments and parliaments of its 46 member states to strengthen respect for human rights, democracy, and the rule of law in Europe. And since becoming a member state in 2001, Azerbaijan has benefited from the Council of Europe's support in its democratic transition. Conversely, the Council of Europe, we benefited from the contribution of Azerbaijan for promoting its values and increasing its outreach. It is a mutually beneficial cooperation, which is an open-ended and of course, serious improvements and reforms are certainly necessary. But we need each other, and I hope that the Azerbaijani delegation will soon be back in the Parliamentary Assembly, which, as I understand, you also stated in your debate and resolution yesterday, so that the cooperation and dialogue can continue in the interests of the values that unites us. As President of the Committee of Ministers, I am at the disposal of all the parties concerned with the view to encouraging the most acceptable solutions for all, so as to enable our organization to continue the tremendous work it has been doing over the last 75 years. And then I'm coming back to the question of Mr. Hasler. Hasler seems to be quite a famous name in Liechtenstein. He asked about the main topics which we are going to set within the 75th anniversary. First of all, I want to thank you. The anniversary is organized by the Secretariat, and the Committee of Ministers contributes to the organization in many events. The official ceremony will take place on the 16th of May, back to back with the next ministerial session. So I'm very thankful that we will be able to combine that. At this occasion, the Liechtenstein presidency, I already mentioned it, is also planning a youth event with the clear aim that, of course, we are well aware of the importance of a well-functioning Council of Europe today, but we also need a youth which is interested in the Council of Europe, which knows the importance of the Council of Europe, and we do believe an anniversary is the perfect moment to integrate them, but also to listen to their voices where they see the Council of Europe perhaps during the next 75 years, because then they will be in charge and celebrate the anniversary of this very important organization.
So I think that if the next three colleagues will be as brief as my colleague from Hungary was. Sorry.
Sorry for that. I was so much into celebrating, I forgot the question. Sorry for that. I'm coming back to your question. Apologize once again, because it's a very important question about minority languages. The important role of the Council of Europe in promoting and protecting national minorities was again stressed in Reykjavik Declaration, and the Council of Europe has developed 2 unique treaties with no equivalent worldwide. First, the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities and the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages. The level of implementation of the monitoring body's recommendations is, however, insufficient in many states parties and needs to be strengthened. You mentioned that in your question too. Cooperation activities could be reinforced in that respect, and the use of minority languages included in the Council of Europe action plans. In addition, the ratification of the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages could be further promoted, including by your Assembly itself, whose members have the possibility to boost the ratification processes in their respective parliaments. Speaking one's own language is a crucial part of identity, and promoting the use of regional and minority languages is promoting the cultural diversity of Europe, and I think in this sense we should further shape this process together.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Dear colleagues, I only want to remind you that we have 5 minutes, so I would ask kindly my colleagues to ask their questions in the limit of 30 seconds. And now is Ariana Musliou-Sossi. You have the floor.
Mr. President, thank you. Madam President, it's a pleasure to have you here. As it has been noted by democratic countries that Kosovo's commitment for the last 20 years has been in line with values of this institution and with values of the European Union countries. So my question to you is, when do you foresee the decision of the Committee of Ministers on Kosovo's application for full membership, and what's your stand on this? Thank you.
Thank you, Ariana. And the next question is by Mrs. Arusiak Julhakian.
Thank you, Chair. Madam Minister, after all the devastating developments in our region, including the ethnic cleansing in Nagorno-Karabakh, Azerbaijan continues to threaten its neighbor, Armenia, with renewed use of force, making new claims and demands. In this alarming situation, the international community should be very vigilant. Any reluctance on the part of the international community to take decisive steps will only encourage Azerbaijan to launch new aggressions. I would like to ask you about the actions of your presidency. What has been done so far and what is planned to do to deter Azerbaijan from further escalating the situation in the region? Thank you.
The third question from Mrs. Katia Tsilosani.
Thank you, Mr. President. Madam Minister, thanks a lot for your really great address regarding Georgia's territorial integrity and sovereignty, and for your really good support and strong voice to mention Russia's aggressive steps towards Georgia and Georgia's occupation. And thank you also for your strong language about declaring the role of peaceful conflict resolution and non-recognition policy. So I want to know, what is your view regarding the efforts and efficiency to utilize existing tools within the Council of Europe to address the challenges and concerns related to the security architecture and human rights violations resulting from Russia's occupation? And in addition, how do you see that we can ensure Russia's role to meet the commitments that was mandated by the European Union of the ceasefire agreement in 2008. Thank you.
Mrs. Minister, would you like to respond?
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for giving me the floor again. I start with answering the question from Ms. Soshi. Again, coming back to the topic of Kosovo, I could just underline what I have already said. The official procedure for membership to the Council of Europe was launched in May 2022, and the procedure now is in the parliamentary phase, as you are well aware. And of course, once the committee has received the opinion of your Assembly, it will decide in accordance with the state of the Council of Europe and relevant rules whether to adopt a resolution inviting Kosovo to become a member. And we are well aware of the sensitive nature of the issue, and I will do in my role as the President of the Committee of the Minister to work with all Member States together to ensure a sound and fair process in line with our rules. Then I want to come back to the question of Madame Yuhakayan relating to the situation in Armenia. Peace and stability in the Caucasus region are of key importance, not only for the people of Armenia and Azerbaijan, but for the Council of Europe as a whole. The role of the Council of Europe is to provide the necessary assistance to states that so wish to strengthen respect for human rights and good governance. Democratic security is, in our view, the best guarantee of a greater security for all. Hence, the action plans, I mentioned them before, regularly adopted by the Committee of Ministers, they build a basis to help Member States in fulfilling their commitments. And the Council of Europe can also help actively to establish conditions conducive to a peace agreement by encouraging confidence-building measures. In this context, I very much welcome the recent initiatives launched by the Secretary General, as well as the recent report by the Commissioner for Human Rights following her visit to Armenia and Azerbaijan, and I think they also give a roadmap for the further steps we should do together. And then I got a third question from Ms. Ziliozani. Thank you very much for your question about Georgia. And here I just want to underline that the Committee of Ministers has on numerous occasions expressed its full support for Georgia's territorial integrity and sovereignty within the international recognized borders. And I think we have to recall the Reykjavik Summit Declaration. It calls also on the Russian Federation to immediately withdraw its forces from Georgia, and you can be assured that this will be also a topic which will continue to be a very important one in the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe. Thank you very much for your questions.
And at this point, I want to warmly thank Minister Hasler for her presence and the answers he gave this afternoon to my colleagues. Dear colleagues, the Assembly will hold its next public sitting later this afternoon at 3:30 p.m. with the agenda which was approved on Monday. I invite you to be in the hemicycle at your seats in good time for the communication from the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Maria Pecinovic-Buric, at 3:30 p.m. And for those colleagues who will be leaving Strasbourg today and will not be attending this afternoon, please could you deposit your voting cards in the ballot box provided for this purpose at the end of the chamber. The sitting is adjourned.